And we've just got Nathan Zampronio in the studio right now. Say hello. Thank you for coming, Nathan. Appreciate you turning up, mate.
Sean, it's always a pleasure to be with you.
You're in to have a chat about local government.
Sure.
And the local government conference you went on your little adventure into Canberra. Sounds like you've had a great week representing the Hawkesbury Council and the Hawkesbury people.
Oh, look, I've had a good year, but I'll explain for listeners who have no interest in local government or the way that we put ourselves together. I mean, there are over 500 councils around Australia, and at the national level, there's a conference that's held in Canberra once a year in June called ALGA, Australian Local Government Assembly, or the National General Assembly, and it's councils coming together and networking, comparing notes, seeing what works, generally having a grizzle about how our funding models are broken and how we never have enough money to do what we need to do. And I don't go down every year. I missed last year, but it was a very fruitful time. It was worth my time to go down and talk to federal ministers and put some hard questions to them, and also to talk to other councillors.
So when you talk to other councillors, how much of an exchange of ideas of different practices, policies, ways of doing business do you pick up off other councils? Do you see,
We benefit from having a peak body that speaks across Australia for the issues that are common to us, and they largely relate to funding. The local government sector has no constitutional recognition. There have been attempts to kind of hold referendums and recognise local government in the Constitution, so we're the plaything of other tiers of government. And we have a really fundamental problem with, I'll use an economist's term, vertical fiscal imbalance. Sounds really dry, but the concept's easy enough to understand. There's a gap between the revenue that we can raise and the things that we're responsible for. So councils across Australia raise 4% of all taxation revenue of all descriptions. And yet we are responsible for a third, 33%, of all of the stuff: roads, pools, library, halls, social services of one sort or another, planning functions and so forth. So we don't get enough money, which means that as a sector, we are always dependent on handouts from other tiers of government, which always happens very grudgingly and very arbitrarily and without any consistency or security about the source of funding. The federal government gives us a sum of money, and it could fall into one of a number of buckets. It could be tied funding, which means we can only spend it for a particular purpose, like roads.
Yep.
So there's the Local Roads and Community Infrastructure Grant Program. That's a federal program. Or the Black Spots program that helps us, rehabilitate roads so that they're safer. That's a federal program. Then there's untied funding that we get to choose what we spend it on, and they're called federal assistance grants. Here's the killer statistic for your listeners. In 1996, when John Howard was first elected, federal assistance grants to local government formed 1% of all federal taxation revenue. So of all the tax that the feds collected, they gave 1% to local government.
So every dollar, 1 cent.
And yet we're responsible for a third of everything that goes on in Australia.
Yeah.
We're responsible for 75% of Australia's roads. That's a network of 650,000 kilometres worth of roads, and we've got 1 cent in the dollar. Now, fast forward, 30 years, we get half a cent in the dollar. It's fallen by half. And even if you add back in those special buckets, black spots, local roads, community infrastructure and so forth, the aggregate is still well short of where we used to be years ago. And yet the federal government squirts perfume on a piece of poo and says, look at all this money that we're giving you. And we're saying, no, there's a structural deficit here that's been sliding for years and years and years, which means that councils don't have enough money to do what they do. Our ability to raise our own revenue through rating is held under the rate peg, which means that our costs start to accelerate ahead of the rate peg. And then once a decade or so, we have to go cap in hand back to the state government, back to IPART, and put an application in for a special rate variation to jack up our rates by maybe a third. I mean, last time we did this in 2017, we had to jack up rates by a third. I voted against it at that time, but I'm now aware of how the whole sector is set up to fail. So we put in an application for an SRV, and the community, who are suffering cost of living pressures are out there with flaming brands and pitchforks saying, well, you're not doing a terribly good job with the money we're already giving you. Why should we give you any more? And I'm rather sympathetic to that argument too. But people expect their roads and libraries and pools to be maintained to a certain standard, and at the moment, council's going out backwards. We're flush with money that are the overhang of grants that came for bushfire and flood recovery and build back. Once that money evaporates, and all of that money is going to more or less finish evaporating over the next 12 to 18 months, our true budgetary position will be exposed, and it's dire. That it's a symptom of a deeper cause, because when the budget's in deficit, an elected chamber it's a core part of their responsibility. They have to ask questions about, well, what do we cut? Nobody wants to cut anything. So the Lower Portland Ferry was an enormous expense to council.
Yep.
Thankfully, that was taken off our hands, and the state government was one of those rare occasions where the state government saw sense and said, yeah, it's a bit of an anomaly, isn't it? You know, Roads and Maritime run every ferry in New South Wales except this one, which is the joint responsibility of Hawkesbury and Hills Council. You know what? We will take that off your hands. That was a blessing.
Yeah.
In the sense that the ferry keeps on running and we weren't forced into a difficult decision to cancel it. But then, you know, if the budget's in deficit and you're holding public events through the year, there's Australia Day, there's Savour the Flavour, there's Hawkesbury Fest, there's Christmas lights.
Light Up Windsor.
You know, Light Up Windsor. What do you do? And that whole debate about, well, we can't afford to do this every year. Maybe we do it every second year. And then there were people who were prepared to cut Australia Day, and I was one of those people who put my foot down really firmly and said, no, if we're going to cut something, we're not cutting Australia Day. That's a red line.
And I appreciate that. And I understand what Danielle Weller was trying to do. And to me, I thought that's a good idea in the sense that you're bringing a outside government entity that could make a bit of money, which, you know, the Pioneer Village is a volunteer-based sort of organisation/business, that the council could work a team and a collaboration there. That would have been a good idea as far as I was concerned.
Oh, look, there's things that you can do. Then there are the things that are foisted upon you at very short notice that you simply have to do something. And a good example is the upcoming Airshow.
Yes.
So on the in late September, there's going to be a fantastic Airshow. It's the first big air show we've had in decades.
Yep.
I grew up. You're of a similar age.
Yep.
You know, remembering the air shows that were with the Richmond RAAF base. You know, back in the late 80s and 90s, they were absolutely tremendous. And I have been, every time I cross paths with, you know, like a new air wing commander out at the RAAF base, my first question to them is, when are we going to have another air show? And I've been badgering Susan Templeman, and now finally we've all collectively realised that it's the centenary of the base this year.
Yes.
The base is 100 years old this year. Yes. There will never be a better opportunity to commemorate that wonderful milestone, because the base has been such a huge part of our community. Yeah. But then also, you know, to have an air show and have a great big party. So, you know, for council to come on board and to say, what cultural events could we do? Could we have a movie night on Richmond Oval and watch Top Gun?
That would be actually really cool. The deck chairs out?
No, yep, deck chairs out. We've voted for that. And I'm pleased that we're going to be doing something that kind of gets into the spirit of it. But all these things come at a cost. So
that's right.
To put a series of events on and to kind of activate our local spaces, because this is a huge boon to our economy.
Yeah.
We would be irresponsible if we did nothing with, you know, a couple of 100,000 visitors coming to the Hawkesbury, and to try and do something to convert that into local accommodation, local food, you know, local tourism, and to bring people in and to say, hey, this is happening on our patch, this is who we are.
Yeah.
Come and stay. Don't come for a day, come for a weekend.
That's right.
It's the opening weekend of the October school holidays. You know, make a thing of it, rediscover the Hawkesbury. But these things come at a cost, and they're not in the budget, so therefore we've got to kind of find some way of, you know, moving other things around. It's not an enviable job, but it's the job that people expect. 15-year-old me is really excited about this. And the 15-year-old me is still in here.
That's it.
We run the whole weekend, so it's a Saturday-Sunday thing. So you've got 2 full days. I think most people, if they're going to come to the air show for a day, we want to capture them for the weekend.
That's right.
And have all of that lovely tourism dollars coming back into the local economy. So if we spent, you know, 40 between $40,000 and $80,000 on that. Like I said, none of these things come cheap. We would hope that we would get that and more back, and therefore that's a good investment.
I do. The other one that's going on at the moment, and I'm not sure if you're aware of it, is there's a bike race through Bilpin. I think Fiona Germain, I think she's pushing that forward with state government, and there's a lot of others up there at the Bilpin.
Bell's Line of Road Business.
Bell's Line of Road Business Group. Yes, that's the correct one.
Yeah, and I wish them well. I mean, anything that we can do to kind of activate any space is going to have an appeal beyond our own borders. And I think sometimes we as locals, we take a lot of our advantages for granted.
Yes.
I mean, when I travel and I go to a place like Berry, down the coast.
Everyone thinks pie shop.
Yeah, I mean, beautiful town with historic buildings, and they've built an entire economy around that. Now, it's a mistake to only build your economy around tourism, but the thing is, they're doing more than we are, and we have this wonderful heritage, and here we are arguing like cats and dogs about what we should do with the mall, or how we can activate tourism. We had a tourism committee; it doesn't function anymore. So it's pretty sad. We need to do a better job.
Yeah, I think the other thing that it's great that you've got the Bells Line of Road Business Council up there. The guys down at Sackville, they've got the wine country down there. They're not there's only like 3 players there, but then they're sort of underrepresented because that's only their section. The other thing is that their agricultural input compared to Bilpin is a lot bigger, so that makes it a bigger, diverse input of businesses. Because you've got the fruit bowl and all the orchards up there and the fruit picking as well as the tourist dollars. So that gives you, a different output. Whereas down here with the Sackville and the wine country, you've just got one product. And so they're a hidden gem. If you've gone down and you've seen them, they're fantastic for Hawkesbury's tourism, but they're always the forgotten people down there. And it's
Look, my focus as a council has been to support local businesses.
Yeah.
And to ensure that people have the ability to be entrepreneurs and to leverage whatever our natural advantages are, historical and economic and otherwise, and then also to provide employment opportunities so that people don't have to commute out of the area and we just become a series of dormitory suburbs where nothing happens. That, people make things, people trade, there's retail, there's hospitality, there's tourism, and all of the other things that make for a healthy and a well-rounded community. Yeah.
And that's where we're sort of trying to get at. The other thing I was going to look at here, that with your little adventures and on your video clip, was the electric revolution, and you took some photos there. Can you tell us what was their stands about that, or was that something else or another conference?
Look, this is a more nuanced argument, but it goes like this: we go down to this conference, and there's a convention floor, and all of the people who trade with local government, have their wares on display, and there were a couple of vendors that were demonstrating electric vehicles. Now, we're increasingly seeing electric vehicles on the road, but heavy fleet, things like ride-on mowers, things like tip trucks, things like large utility vehicles, things like garbage collection trucks and so forth, have been traditionally harder to electrify. I'm here to tell you and your listeners that we're at that point. So even a council's heavy fleet can be electrified now, which means that all of those advantages, those longer-term cost savings of fuel and the maintenance of an internal combustion engine and so forth, and not to mention the environmental benefits, start to flow to people who have a heavy fleet and were thinking about electrifying it. The numbers add up.
Yeah.
And the way I phrase this to people who kind of frown and say, Nathan, why should we care? It's this. Up until now, people have thought of the electrification of their vehicles, just like, going solar on their house or getting a battery or something like that, as a kind of virtue signalling boondoggle. It's like you pay through the nose, you pay extra for an electric vehicle or a hybrid vehicle, but, what are the economics? Now I'm here to say that the numbers add up in the sense that it's a saving to council. Yeah. And if you run a council well and you want to save money, and the electric option costs you more upfront but saves you net over the life of the vehicle thousands and thousands of dollars,
that's it.
Why wouldn't you do it? So it's not simply something that you do to show your credentials as a good environmentalist. It's something that adds up economically. And I think people are slow to kind of realise that we're at that tipping point. And in the same way, you know, if you were thinking about getting solar on your roof at home,
Yep.
you think in terms of your ROI, your return on investment.
Yeah.
I pay 10 grand up front. Maybe there's some kind of a government subsidy that lowers that cost, but I'm not paying for electricity from then on. When do I start to see a profit? The answer on solar without a battery is between 3 and 5 years. With a battery, it's between 8 and 10 years. But the federal government, with whom I have many differences of opinion, nevertheless, to their great credit, said, well, if we're re-elected, we will extend the, this transition, and we will now add an additional subsidy for people who put solar on and a battery.
Which I'm loving because that's what I do.
And the battery's crucial, to be able to draw on that. Because the feed-in tariff has now dropped away to practically nothing.
Yeah.
People that put in more capacity than they need are generating more electricity than their household can consume, and previously they could sell that back to the grid for some sum. That profit's largely disappeared. So if you're generating more electricity than you need, it's effectively a waste, unless you can use it to fill up a battery. And now you've got 2 or 3 hours worth of power into the evening when the sun don't shine.
Exactly.
And that was the expensive part.
Yeah.
Well, the new federal government scheme is going to lower that cost by about 30%. Yeah. So a 10 grand system, in theory, might only cost you 8 grand because the subsidy isn't on the panels, it's on the battery. And, on my own home, I've thought about this. We've renovated. We've got a lovely home now. That was going to be the next step. And I thought, I'm just going to wait until I see what the federal governments are going to do. And it's here. So I'm seriously contemplating that. And I'd encourage your listeners to do the same.
I would suggest holding off for probably about another 12 months if the subsidy is still going, because the technology that is coming out of China now is accelerating exponentially. It's just...
I now know more about this than I ever thought that I needed to, but there are all these questions about whether you have the inverters on the panels or whether you have a central inverter and whether it's AC or DC, and it's all very complicated, and I think it's really important to find a solar installer that knows the math, is going to fit a solution to a particular household's needs and isn't going to pull the wool over their eyes, because very few people are across the technical details about German versus Chinese, about these style of inverters or otherwise.
Yeah.
But it's correct that with the backing of major governments, renewable, sustainable energy sources they're not the future. They're here.
Yeah.
And it frustrates me to find that there are still some stick in the muds who think of this as some kind of boondoggle. And it's a major industry. And, even if you ignore all of the fairly settled science about climate, I'm, as an educator, I believe in evidence-based policy, and I believe the evidence that's accumulated about the long-term effects to climate.
Yeah, I do.
But even if you ignored all of that, and you said, if we stop burning hydrocarbons, we stop putting money in the pockets of countries that hate us, that by itself is a really good reason for kind of weaning us off the burning of fossil fuels. Never mind that those fossil fuels are going to run out. It's a non-renewable resource. That we've built our entire civilization on something that's going to run out in the next 100 years.
Exactly.
But the sheer idea that we can not only clean up the environment but also stop giving money to countries that hate us, I think it's a really good idea.
Well, that's it. And I look at it this way, like, we need to have that sort of independence. Looking at microgrid technologies, and that we are basically in control of our energy source. Now, there's great gas generators out there, small ones for homes, for Generac, and you can have your solar and your batteries. So then basically most semi-rural homes should be self-sufficient on a very basic level. And it's a lot cheaper. There was actually a guy in at Blackslands Ridge, and he owns a company called After Hours Auto Electrical. Rob Lindsay's his name. He bought a generator off us. And this is back in 2019. I formed this relationship with him, looking after his generator and technical needs. And I came out to do a little job for him, and he showed me his solar setup and his battery setup and his diesel generator. It was cheaper to have that than run the HV lines and have a transformer down to his house at Blackslands Ridge. Mm-hmm. He has now just put in, because he bought the batteries second hand, because he's a pretty smart guy, off UPSs. He's just put in brand new sets of batteries. So he's had 6 years out of a set of second-hand batteries, lead-acid ones, and his solar panels and his diesel generator, and it's still cheaper, but now his neighbours have paid for the HV to get in, and he's contemplating, well, is that cheaper or is it just an alternative source? And I said, well, I'd use it as an alternative source.
You redo the math. The picture is moving so continuously and increasingly rapidly that, you know, what you thought mightn't have been an economic proposition 5 years ago, you've got to come back to that. So a lot of people that went, oh, look, I did think about solar, I even thought about batteries, but the numbers didn't add up. The ROI was too long.
Yeah.
Well, that's not the case now.
It's changing.
Because the cost of production, the economies of scale, the ability to kind of get this technology effectively, you know, printed on a substrate, they're so cheap. And the lifespan of that technology also continues to extend. So we're well outside my remit as a local government council.
We've gone off the rails here.
I'm merely offering my opinion. By the way, that also gives me an opportunity to throw in, as I'm obliged to, is that I'm only here in my own capacity. I'm not an official spokesperson for council, but I'm always happy to provide my opinion on subjects.
Well, that's it. Well, we've covered that. Now, this is one of the ones that I was looking at, and the thing that's come up in the last council meeting, and we're going into a lot of the topics that you wanted to raise with the conversation. My big one here is that the last council meeting, there was only one person that got up and spoke about Mr. Lionel Bucket. He was fantastic. He spoke about the Windsor Sewerage divestment scheme, and you used it as Darth Vader terms when you spoke about it. Pray the deal doesn't change again.
Indeed. All right then. So let's explain this for listeners that might not be up to speed with this. Hawkesbury Council is in a peculiar situation. Through a historical anachronism, we are the only council in the Sydney metropolitan area that owns and runs our own sewerage system. It's a weird thing, but the sewerage pipes and system and the sewage treatment plants in various places, including there at McGrath's Hill, Mulgrave, opposite Windsor High School, is all owned by council. Everywhere else, it's owned and run by Sydney Water. And Sydney Water are a huge organisation that have huge economies of scale, and even if something very expensive happens somewhere on their network, it's not as though the people in that area are disadvantaged because those costs get spread across the whole state.
Yeah.
Or at least across all of Sydney.
And they have a large maintenance team that can react quickly.
Exactly. Whereas we have a problem with our sewerage and our ratepayers cop it in the neck. And the poster child for that phenomenon is when Rising Main C broke, which is a pipe that takes all of the poo from Windsor, South Windsor and Bligh Park across to the sewage treatment plant across South Creek and to the sewage treatment plant there at Mulgrave. And it broke. There was a bank subsidence during the floods. The pipe broke and it cost us $30 million to fix. Now, how on earth could fixing one pipe cost $30 million?
Pretty easily, quite quickly.
It broke, and then we started to fix it, and then we had 2 or 3 more floods in quick succession. So everything that was started went back to ground zero and repeatedly. Secondly, we couldn't ask those people in Windsor, South Windsor and Bligh Park to just stop flushing their toilets.
That's what the RAAF did.
So what we did is that we had a system of trucks that basically took what would have gone through the pipe by trucks to the sewage treatment, and those trucks had to run 24/7 for months and months and months and months and months, and the costs just added up.
Yeah.
I would have put the view that it would have been cheaper in the long run for us to buy trucks and employ drivers as council assets.
You're probably right.
If you knew that you would need this for the length of time that we did. But of course, it's only hindsight that's 2020. So what our staff did is that they hired those trucks and they hired those drivers
they did what they had to.
At commercial rates. And the bill ended up being stratospheric. Could better decisions have been made? Yes. Could we have known in advance that when we started up this cycle of trucks and drivers is that we would need them for, and I can't remember how many months it was, but let's say it was 4 months, 6 months. It was a stupidly long length of time. That's where the money went. And we're so unhappy about the fact that it was so eye-wateringly expensive and that it's our ratepayers that incurred that debt, that we've got an independent investigator looking at the way that this issue was handled, the way it was handled organisationally by council and its staff, and in terms of what information were provided to councillors, and whether we were provided enough information to provide guidance to staff at the right times with the right data, and that investigator is yet to produce their finding. But, I mean, it's been really expensive, and our ratepayers have copped it in the neck precisely because this is our asset. But it gets worse. Several of our sewage treatment plants, and again, I'm largely thinking of the one at Mulgrave, are approaching the end of their life.
Yeah.
And there's only so much you can do with ongoing maintenance to extend that. If we had to replace that sewage treatment plant at Mulgrave, it would cost tens of millions of dollars. And again, that would be our money, or the debt that we incur on behalf of just our... Now, if this was owned by Sydney Water, they would amortise those costs, and they would, you know, charge the same rate for sewerage that other people under Sydney Water sewerage get charged elsewhere in Sydney, and then they would be landed with the bill to replace or circumvent the sewage treatment plant at Mulgrave and so forth. That's the argument that's effectively been put to us.
Yeah.
On the other side of that argument is the fact that these assets have a capital value of $170 million. It's not an insubstantial asset.
No.
And yet, the terms that have been presented to us by Sydney Water say, we will take all of these assets off your hand for nothing.
Yeah, and that's my gripe too.
For like $1.
Yeah, no.
And furthermore, because
there's age and
because sewer is run as a business unit within council, its funds are kind of segregated. It's our debt. It's also our revenue, because it is a revenue-producing arm of council, and it produces a modest dividend, except for those times where suddenly it's in the hole because something breaks, like that huge pipe. But they've told us that they won't take that debt on. Originally, we were promised in these negotiations with Sydney Water that not only would they take on the asset, but they'd take on the debt, which was a sweetener for us, because that $30 million of debt is an opportunity cost to council. As we pay off that debt, that's money that we could have otherwise put into the maintenance of local roads, parks, libraries, and all the rest of it. And they've told us that they'll take that $170 million asset off our hand for nothing.
Yeah, it's not.
And they'll take that revenue stream off us.
For nothing too?
For whatever it was worth. And they won't take on the debt. So we're left with the debt, but we hand over the asset. and
any potential revenue. And
because that wasn't what we were originally promised, that's why I quoted Darth Vader. You know, the deal has been changed, but pray it doesn't order it, because it just gets worse and worse. Yeah. And council feels like it has a gun to its head.
Yeah, that's right.
So
that's
that vote that came before council, you know, within the last weeks, had a deadline associated with it. We had to give an indicative signal to Sydney Water that we were in earnest and that we were going to continue these negotiations, because IPART had a deadline about how they were calculating, you know, the fairness of pricing across Sydney, and they had their own process and their own timeline associated with that. And what we've done so far is to vote to continue the negotiation, but we're not at the point of contractual obligation. We haven't signed a contract. And what I think the Chamber was trying to do was express our displeasure at the fact that this deal was put to us in rosier terms earlier.
It's changed.
And it's less rosy now, and yet we're expected to just suck it up. And I don't want to suck it up.
No, and I that's where I'm sort of like, at least, just at the very least, state government, take over the debt. All right? Yeah, all right, you've got, and this is what was playing out in my mind while this debate was going on. Ageing asset that is in dire need of upgrade and maintenance. A lot of parts of it are at end of life. And that Sydney Water are like, oh, how much money we're not going to make that much money back off it. So we're just going to tell them that we're going to lose money on taking over it, and you can lose some money too because you'll just take the debt. And in my mind, well, hang on, they paid for the repairs of Rising Main C. You are entitled to at least pay, because that's a new section of pipe.
There's a peculiar twilight zone logic that applies when transactions are made between government instrumentalities. In any other sphere, in the commercial sphere, You know, if Microsoft wanted to buy Yahoo, or if a Chinese company wanted to buy Volvo, and there was an asset and debt, the transaction is for the asset and the debt.
Yeah,
you have to take the debt on, because that's part and parcel. And we are statutorily required to keep both our revenue and our debt associated with the sewerage, you know, compartmentalised off from the rest of council. So in my mind, they come together. To separate them, simply because you're carrying a bigger stick, like Sydney Water does, I think is a bum deal. And I just wanted to flag that I think that this is a bum deal.
Okay.
But it has a lot of other advantages, which is why we're in such a bind about what to do about this.
Well, to me, it's a no-brainer. Sydney Water has the resources. You've got the engineers, you've got the EPA testing, you've got the coordinated effort, what is needed, of knowledge, basically knowledge-based. And that is, like, Hawkesbury Council is a small, semi-rural council, and to find those engineers and those specialist people is getting harder and harder, and they become more expensive.
I want our government to be as small and lean as it needs to be. I don't think our council should be in the business of running a ferry. That issue's been dispensed with. We shouldn't be in the business of running a sewerage scheme, because it's a historical anachronism. Council shouldn't be in the business of running childcare centres, and we don't. We own the land on a lot of what our childcare centres operate on, but we lease them out for you know, peppercorn rents or below commercial rents, and we let other operators manage the childcare centres.
That's a whole different kettle of fish.
I know,
it should be state government
and
regulated.
do so hoping that they provide value to the broader community. Because if they're enjoying the privilege of running a preschool on council land, we want them to be providing value to the community.
Yeah, and like childcare, you've almost, that's another, because Kate, my wife, has worked in childcare for such a long period of time. I understand a lot of it, and I don't want to go down too much of a rabbit hole because it gets us away from it. Because I believe that the childcare should be a lot more regulated, because that's the start. Like you're an educator as well. That's the start of a child's education and social interaction and learning, and you're shaping them to go into the next stage, which is primary school, which then gets them on.
You're quite right in the sense that there's a curriculum and a syllabus and a whole heap of rules that I have to follow as a high school teacher here locally. But preschool, pre-K education is just as important, and it's not regulated in terms of its curriculum. There are no academic outcomes because these are tiny little kids. Nevertheless, I can tell you that there's a distinct advantage in having a young person coming into kindergarten knowing their letters and numbers and knowing the rudiments of things, because it helps to scaffold, as we say as teachers, to build on
the next
those
level.
skills. And like, again, that's well beyond my responsibility as a counsellor.
As a counsellor, I know.
I'm now wearing my teacher hat, and I want preschools to do well, but my point is that there are 9 different childcare centres in the Hawkesbury that operate off council land, and a bunch of private ones that are for-profit, run as businesses, and there are similarities, but also some specific differences. And I want to ensure that where something runs off council land is that it's low cost, and that those childcare operators aren't hiving away money and sticking it into a barrel and then crying poor when council comes back to them and says, well, this needs a bit of a revamp. If you're just going to make a profit that you can't spend because you're a not-for-profit operator, and then stow that money in a hollow log, then we're just going to end up charging you a more commercial rent for you to do what you do, because again, council's overall financial position is something that has to be considered, and it isn't a charity.
And is that also part of that, like with the council idea? The idea is that because the council charges such a peppercorn rent, that the childcare should be cheaper?
That's okay. That would
because that overhead's lower.
That would be my desire. Whether that's actually articulated in policy, I'd have to get back to you. But what I do know is that some operators, are solvent in the sense that they've got an account with an accumulating balance that could be 6 figures or more, and they don't spend it because they kind of can't, because they're a not-for-profit operator. So if we want to redevelop and improve a site, they expect us to do that, whereas, they've been accumulating profit
So they could actually pay for the upgrade of the site because they can't spend it, which they should invest into.
I won't say more about that because it's a thorny issue and the childcare community are very antsy. And all I can say is that our council staff do a really, really good job of negotiating and trying to find a middle path through these issues so that everybody is treated fairly.
Yeah, that's a and that's what the idea of government is supposed to be, is that you're treated fairly. We've got 15 minutes left. I'm just trying to find what was our other talking points that you wanted to bring up. Was the council's report card.
Detached dual occupancy was a big. Yep. Okay then. So at one of our most recent council meetings, I had what I'd regard as a big win. Council and what we build and where is dictated by a planning instrument called the LEP, Local Environmental Plan. It is the canonical document. It's the Bible for, what our zones are, what you're allowed to build in those zones, the scale of buildings and a whole heap of stuff. Our current working LEP document dates to 2012 and it's no longer fit for purpose.
No.
It's clapped out. And we began the process of updating the LEP in about 2017, 2018. And it's now, 7 years and counting, and we're still waiting. We are still waiting. There's this ping pong between council and the state government, a process called Gateway, where it goes to the planning department at the state government, and they cross the T's and dot the I's, and they come back. And it is a conversation until it's basically beaten into a shape that everyone's happy with.
Yep.
That process has dragged on way too long. And it's beyond the scope of this conversation to work out exactly where the blame lays. Some people think that council staff have dragged their feet. Some people think that councillors didn't help because it was ready to be signed off.
Yep.
And then at the beginning of the last term before last, so a bunch of new councillors got elected and they said, we want to pull this back and get our fingerprints on it. And it was like, no, but this is done. It's been dispatched. You can't pull a boat back onto its blocks after it's been launched. But they tried, and that was a delay. And I think even they didn't realise that it was resulting in a delay of years and years and years.
Yeah.
Or whether the problem is with the state government. Long story short, what we're waiting for in the new LEP are a bunch of goodies that people have been clamouring to me about for years. So innovations in ecotourism and dual occupancy and granny flats. So people that want to put a granny flat or a secondary dwelling close to their house, there's a new definition that's more generous. Yep. Instead of building a 60 square metre granny flat, you could build a 110 square metre granny flat. Or 20% of the size of the primary dwelling, whichever is the larger. That's something that will be in the new LEP. Cool. Similarly, we've got this weird, stupid rule that says anywhere that you can have an attached dual occupancy, that's to say a second full-size house.
Yep.
It's got to be attached to the main house.
Basically a duplex.
Yeah, like a duplex shares a common wall or something that shares a breezeway or a covered walkway. Mum and Dad have got exactly the same arrangement out of their house at Oakville.
Yep.
And but you couldn't put it elsewhere on the same block.
Yeah.
The state government says, look, you can have an attached dual occupancy, but you can't have a detached dual occupancy because of flood evacuation risk. And we're saying, but it would be exactly the same. You've got the same number of people living there. They'd be sharing a driveway, a letterbox and a water meter. The only difference is that the landowner has more flexibility of being able to site another house on their own land, and we're talking about acreage here.
Yeah.
We're not talking about Bligh Park or Hobartville.
No.
We're talking about people that have got 5 acres and up, being able to site another dwelling. And the way I explain this to people is I say the benefits are so overwhelmingly obvious. People can have their parents, their elderly parents, living in their senior years, close to family with a degree of dignity and independence. They can share the costs of living, share the burdens of property maintenance. There's a childcare component built into having, your parents living nearby. So you're reducing the burden on not only the aged care system, but also the childcare system.
Yeah.
You're allowing young families, so your kids have grown up, they don't want to move away, get caught in the rental cycle, have to live an hour away from, where they work, or move away from the community that they grew up in and felt an affinity. Parents want their kids, give them a leg up. And again, this is into subdivision. This is under one title. Yeah. And I ran out of patience, frankly. And I said, after 7 years, How much longer are we going to accept this BS that it's just around the corner, 7 years, and we're still waiting. So I carved that bit off, and I said, let's move this separately. This is low-hanging fruit. This is something that the state government want us to do. So don't tell me that it's going to get log-jammed in the state government's planning portal again. They want us to do this. If this comes to them just as this one thing, they're going to give it a tick as quickly as you can think. So I did. I carved it off. I brought it to the chamber. Yes, it's something that was already underway as part of our LEP, but like that's just been put off to the never now.
Well, it's like my chip to China. It'll happen one day.
The gallery was packed, and it was at that moment that I realised that this had touched a real nerve in the community of people who have acreage, want to be able have the ability to put another dwelling on there for precisely the reasons that I just told you about.
Yeah.
And that it doesn't represent, wholesale subdivision, which I'm, opposed to my dying breath. But it's a good thing to do for a variety of social and economic reasons. Everyone in the chamber voted for it, except for Labor's Amanda Kotlash, for reasons that simply defy me. But Amanda is Amanda, and she can come on your show and she can answer for herself.
She wouldn't. She does not like me by any stretch of the imagination.
All right, then. But anyway,
tried to help her out.
I have to observe to your listeners that it was universally praised and voted for, with the exception of Labor, and that's now going to go through the planning process. It's such a good idea. I have been overwhelmed by calls from people outside the Hawkesbury who are saying, Nathan, this is a fantastic idea. Can we do this in our LGA? So I've got a colleague who's on Port Macquarie Hastings Council.
Yep.
He's moved a motion with a similar wording up at Port Macquarie Hastings and got it through. I've had a call from an independent councillor down in Wallandilly who says, Nathan, this is a fantastic idea. How can I do this down in Wallandilly? And I'm beginning to take the view that it's such a good idea, it would be amazing if the state government would take this on and they put it through as a rule in a SEP. So, stay tuned in that space.
It sounds like that it's a good thing with a grassroots local government movement that you've networked with these people that are all taking on board this idea, which I think the Labor Chris Minns government would want to do this, to have someone in the local Labor Hawkesbury branch just go, let's just wait for the LEP.
Yeah. I mean, the state government's been very overt in saying we need to increase the amount and flexibility of housing stock.
Yeah.
And then there's somebody like me that's built my political reputation on standing against subdivision, intensification, loss of agricultural land, what's coming towards us through Vineyard Stage 1, the Gables, Box Hill, what's on the other side of Windsor Road, what's down the Windsor Road, what's on the other side of Boundary Road, to me is a tragedy.
Rest of the river is going to be...
It's a tragedy. It's a crime. And, we're facing increasing pressures to do this, of all places. West of the river, when you've got all the bottlenecks of the bridge or lack of bridges, two more bridges it would need to kind of bring things back to a reasonable level, and then they want to put thousands of houses on top of that. I'm against all of that. But this seems like a very sensible thing to do. So I was pleased that I got the support in the chamber for that.
I do think it's a stepping stone. I think, we're not going to escape. I was looking at it, and basically they own their land. You cannot take that away from them. They've invested in that land, and they're looking to do it. The Celestinos are using it as an investment, and it's also a tax write-off. Like, I think it was a guy called Michael Zolan or something. He's the chairman of the Australian Property Developers Council, and he said there's no such thing as land banking. And you and I both know that's absolute BS. There's a big sign that says at Bennett Real Estate, opportunity for land banking, but yet he's the chairman of the Australian Property Developers Council saying there is none of that. And we've got that here in Hawkesbury. So we have to, let's be honest with the conversation with those people who are talking the BS. And we're going to say, look, you've got your land banking. We know you're going to come here. We want to build communities with the roads, with the education, with the access to hospitals and jobs and transport for the Western Sydney Airport that is coming, right? Because that'll start a whole new sort of infrastructure boom in the west of Sydney, as far as I'm concerned. That's going to happen in the next 5 to 6 years. We need to go to them and say, we know that that's going to be your plan in 5 to 6 years' time, that in about 10 years' time, that's when they will want to start to sell those. We've got to have the infrastructure ready on the ground for them to go to sell the best end product to them, because you see, they talk this big game of come to the Hawkesbury, come to Redbank Plains, it's a lifestyle. No, you're sitting in a traffic jam.
I have a large and growing collection of photos of real estate signs that are overtly land banking spruiking. And, you know, people that live with developing marching towards them are faced with an invidious choice. They dig their heels in because they like the way that they live on acreage property. They bought in years ago for the semi-rural amenity. They've got a market garden next door. They've got an equine property, and they don't want to lose that. Yeah. But they're also being taxed off their land because of all of the property speculation. And when a land banker comes in and buys your property, it's not because there's a family that's going to take up occupancy in your home and send their kids to the local school. They're going to put short-term rental people in there who have no sense of community, and they want a dividend on that investment. And that dividend can't come quickly enough. So they're going to pile pressure on the council to zone for redevelopment areas that weren't on our radar, that weren't part of our housing, and that's exactly what's happening. Yeah. And it's a tragedy and a crime. I know when somebody from the Urban Development Institute or the Property Developers Council or the Real Estate Institute of New South Wales are lying because their lips are moving. They do not have our interests at heart. No. I want to ensure that if these things are inevitable, and I'm pragmatic enough to know that some things may be inevitable, I want our community to be making those decisions. Exactly. I want us to have agency. I want us to have the last say rather than to be subjected to huge pressure by property developers and their land bankers who have no sense of sentiment towards the land that they're buying and simply want a return on their investment, until we end up with more ticky-tacky houses with no eaves, so close to each other you can't walk between them.
Fire hazards.
Yeah.
Access hazards.
You know, the kind of property development, the style of property development that we see in the Hills area.
And
you know,
on Marsden Park.
If you go to Jordan Springs or Marsden Park or Box Hill or the Gables, we do not want that style of development, which is why I'm a favour of preserving our acreage, but giving families the ability to put another house on their own block under one title.
Yeah, and it's
a buffer.
It's a buffer.
It's a buffer between something that might not be sustainable and the more intensive forms of subdivision and development that we simply do not want. It walks the middle path. And I'm unashamed about saying that it's a kind of social engineering, but it's the best kind of social engineering there is, because it creates multi-generational living. And I think multi-generational living is something that, you know, we can get used to. I mean, you know, the 20-something or 30-something kids that can't afford to rent and can't afford to move out and it's living under mum and dad's roof, that's not healthy. No. But the young family who can build a full self-contained house where there's a degree of independence and dignity elsewhere on mum and dad's 5-acre block.
Or acre in my case.
Yeah, that's a winner. Yeah.
I'm here with Nathan. We've been talking about local government and a lot of other different bits and pieces, but in this last little segment until 11:30, we're going to talk about the council report card.
Okay then, so I had another little win recently, because when I came onto council, one of the things that I really wanted to do was to increase everybody's sense of ownership of our local government, because it's not our government, it's everyone's government. I mean, when I was first elected to council, things had come to such a sorry pass as that there was a security cordon around the back of the chairs in the chamber to physically separate the gallery from the councillors, so the people in the gallery had this kind of physical and symbolic barrier between themselves, because people weren't getting along. This was the era where people were so poorly disposed to one another, is that we had to hire a security guard for council meetings. And we got rid of that pretty quick, because we wanted things to kind of, you know, be more open and accountable. And one of the things that I did is I brought a motion so that simple stuff like attendance figures would be collated every meeting, and that at the end of the term there'd be a report card about which councillors turned up and did their job. Pretty simple stuff. I don't think any of your listeners would object to that kind of accountability being reported to people because most people don't pay attention. Very few people come to council meetings. Who would you know turned up, what they stood for, whether they did their job, whether they were there 2/3 of the time, half the time, and I thought this was a good thing. I got that up. Then some of the councils got cold feet, and within a couple of months they brought it what was called a rescission motion, and that clawed it back. So they said they actively said we do not want this kind of accountability. We do not want it. So a local group with which I had some affiliation called Hawkesbury City Council Watch started their own website and their own Facebook group where they reported on what happened at every council meeting and who voted which way, just simply stuff that was on the public record.
Register, yep.
And prior to the last election, they were able to produce precisely that report card. Do you know why? It's because I collected those figures. I kept a spreadsheet. Every meeting I went to, and I've got pretty perfect attendance, so it was a pretty, thing.
Accurate
and
scorecard,
I wasn't kind of, doing this to kind of embellish my own reputation. I just wanted people to know that if, as was the case, there are some councillors that turned up to, practically no briefings across the council term, and didn't turn up to more council meetings than they absolutely had to. That was something that the people deserved to know. Now, I'm still collecting those figures. Hawkesbury City Council Watch has gone dormant since the election because it was just a huge burden on my and the other person that was helping me with that their time to be able to do that. I want to bring a motion back to council. I think it's about time that we did this. I want to test the commitment of the new chamber to openness and accountability. I want to bring a motion that says we will take attendance figures for every chamber meeting, but not just that. Every workshop, every briefing, every committee meeting, every citizenship ceremony, and we'll just have a little tally about who turns up and does their job. It is not the only measure of a councillor's diligence. I mean, I'm very active in the social media space.
Yeah.
So I do a lot of stuff on YouTube. I explain stuff. I've got an email newsletter. None of the others do. We're not talking about that kind of measure because that wouldn't be fair.
No.
But turning up and doing your job at briefings so that you're better informed and that you're not the person that asks stupid questions when it comes to the chamber.
Yes.
Because you didn't read your briefing paper or you didn't go to the briefing where all of this was painstakingly explained by staff. That's something that people deserve to know. So look forward to that in the coming months. Furthermore, I did have a win in the sense that councils are obliged to review their code of meeting practice within 12 months following an election. So here we are in that 12-month window following an election, and we've now exhibited a new code of meeting practice. The big innovation that I was able to persuade my colleagues to vote for, or at least a majority of my colleagues to vote for, was that we hold a community forum before council meetings begin. This is an experiment. I do not know if this is going to work, but I know it's worth trying.
Yeah.
Works like this. Council meetings at the moment start at 6:30. Why don't we say that we have the formal business of council meetings starting at 6:50, and for those 20 minutes following 6:30 is that any 4 members from the community who can already register as speakers to any item that's on the business paper.
That's right.
But they're confined to that subject matter. They are only allowed to address council on something that's in the business paper. But what if a person's concern lay outside what was on the business paper? In 20 minutes, you could permit 4 speakers to come to the mic and speak for no more than 5 minutes each about any local concern they like. It has to be relevant to local government. There's no point in coming and lecturing us about social justice in Palestine.
No, that's a waste of time.
Or something of that kind.
Yeah, it has to be local government
But
based.
if it's local government related, anybody should be able to come and speak to whatever's on their heart, and we will listen to them. Now, it's 20 minutes out of our schedule. I think we can afford that time to listen. You wouldn't believe the kind of things that some of my colleagues said. Our Labor friend Amanda Kotlesh said, why should we have to endure that? People might come and say something that I don't agree with. That I'm paraphrasing, but she was literally concerned that people might come and say something that she regards as misinformation or untrue. I said, Amanda, welcome to democracy. I mean, people have a variety of views
Exactly.
that may be factually wrong, that may be, well held but misguided opinion. But in a democracy, we have such a poor reputation as it is for our openness and our accountability. This is one thing that we could do. So Amanda voted against it, and I'm very sorry to say that, some of my former Liberal colleagues, Sarah McMahon and Mike Creed, also voted against holding community forums before council meetings. Look forward to that coming once council staff have evolved the governance around how people register, how we vet people, how we deal with people who kind of try to hog that space. You're not allowed to speak at the 2 consecutive meetings.
Yeah.
It's got to be relevant. There's a kind of a strikes rule. If you continually break the rules, you're abusing this forum. We want to make room for other people and other voices. All of that stuff's being worked through now. And hopefully before the end of the year, that'll come back to the Chamber and we can enact that and see whether it's an experiment worth doing.
I think it's a good experiment because the thing is it provides a welcoming space for people to get interactive with their local government. Because my look at this is local government is the stepping stone and the first step of a path of all democracies in Australia, right? Because it's the base ground. That it's, as you said previously, it does 33% of all the sort of infrastructure that governs people's lives, receives 1% of taxable funding.
Less
than 1%. But yet the military, they're asking for 2.5% of GDP, just throwing it in there. These things are quintessentially what we build our society on, and that then makes us what makes us Australian, really, is how our local governments is represented and acts. And to have people say, oh, you're not allowed to talk. I don't want to hear your opinion. I don't want you to talk. I don't care. I am and I look at it this way. The term I would use is like a spoilt teenage girl who thinks that they're too good is a lot of what our councillors are.
There's a certain sense of entitlement, and I have a real allergy to people who say, why should we listen to the public? We know better. That's not the right attitude to have in local government at all. I want to hear from more young people because as a school teacher, I know this is the generation that's going to have to fix a lot of the messes that we've created, and they've got great ideas. There are issues that don't regularly appear on our business paper, but that are really pressing upon the social fabric. And I'll give you an example. I was mentioning this to you before, and there'll be more to say about this. Our School of Arts in Richmond does great work. And that hall isn't run by council. It's not owned by a government department. It's its own thing. It used to operate under what was called the School of Arts Enabling Act. They're a little law unto themselves. It used to be the case that their insurance costs were picked up by the state government. And then the coalition government, for reasons that pass understanding, repealed the School of Arts Enabling Act, folded the management into the Crown Lands Act. Nobody understood this at the time.
Yep.
And I've looked through the Hansard. Wasn't even mentioned as an unexpected consequence. But those halls, of which the School of Arts is an example, now carry their own insurance costs. They've just had a quote for insurance that's over $30,000 for this year. So they've gone from not having to pay it at all and getting that degree of help from the state government to having $30,000 annually sunk, dead money, into maintaining insurance where, and wait for it, they have to maintain not only building and contents insurance, but public liability insurance, even though every hirer of that space
must have
their own public liability insurance. It's the most ridiculous kind of duplication, and it's killing the viability of these voluntary organisations who do it out of the love for their community, to maintain a historic building, to run a community association, to run a venue that's used by drama groups, dance groups, faith groups of all hues, and then they're hit with this massive impost. And I don't think that the state government thought this through.
No, well, the thing is, like,
I want people to come and kind of tell us what's going on in their lives, so that we can either do something about it because it's in our wheelhouse, or that we can advocate on their behalf to other tiers of government. Because it's that's a terrible example of something that's gone terribly wrong because the legislation wasn't properly formed.
And that's the best part. And then she said that gives that 5 minutes, and you'll have 4 speakers that are going to be for the 4.
Yeah.
Right? And they're going to tell their story with what the art house means to them, and what they do with it. I think the classic example would be what's just happened recently would be the Hawkesbury Woodworking Association, and how that's pulled a lot of people together. Like they're losing their land, the Scouts Hall out at Wilberforce, I think it is, for whatever reason. They're selling it. They're going to lose that land, and I think Les Sheether, from what I could see from the background, Les Sheether pulled it together a lot, and that they will get their workshop area there off at the back of what's the sporting oval there? I think it's the near the cricket club there.
They've been looking for a new home for a long time, and they've been terribly poorly treated because, they just haven't been able to find a home. We had, they'd secured grant funding, and then that grant funding was lost for one reason or another. And it's just a real shame that, we haven't been able to do more for them and more quickly. I want to hear from community groups like that. That's the point.
And the other one that would have, I think it would have been averted, would have been the Windsor Paddlebutt Club. Bert and Susie just rolled into the studios to prepare for the next one. But the Windsor Paddlebutt Club. Now that debacle, that was from the previous council administration, and there's the general manager. From what I could see and how that went, there was a lot to answer to by the general manager. Mm-hmm. But in saying that, in her defence, there was multiple floods that went through at that time. But basically, from what I could see on the outside, it came down to who owned the land, and there was this toing and froing of it was Crown land versus the council, and they didn't know who to get the DA from and all that sort of thing. So that's where my thought is on that. And, people get a lot more time to talk about that.
People are right to be cranky about that. They'd secured an $800,000 grant for the construction of a new clubhouse there in Macquarie Park. And that money was lost because council couldn't get its act together and provide the appropriate declaration that works had commenced. Yeah. Because the acquittal of that grant relied on works commencing by a certain date. Yeah. So even if you've just, dug a bucket of soil and moved it from one side of the site to the other, council are perfectly capable of saying, works have commenced, the grant remains live. There were other issues associated with that grant. For example, the amount that was secured, frankly, wasn't enough to build a facility of the scale that was architected.
Really?
But it doesn't change the fact that this group had gone to the trouble of securing this fund. Yeah. It was fated. I was there standing beside the state member when that grant was announced some years ago. Everyone was upbeat about it. And then, they lost it because of this failure to communicate and this failure to act by particular deadlines. So they're now looking for other sources of funding. But what a lost opportunity!
I don't think they'll regather that type of funding, and I think that sort of dream is now dead. And it's crushed a lot of people's hopes, I think, in the sport here with paddle boating, and then there was the Dragon Club that was using it as well, I think, from memory.
Imagine having dragon boating on our part of the Hawkesbury River. It would have been amazing. Those Pendragons Club either have to go over to Penrith and do it there, or they've got to go all the way up to Lithgow and do it on Lake Lyell or something, somewhere that's a long way away. It's certainly much, much colder. It would have really adorned our area. And, paddle sports is something that you can safely do on that bend of the river. Yeah. I don't want people swimming in that part of the river because they keep drowning. But if they've got life jackets on and they're in canoes or kayaks...
Yeah, you're less chance of drowning.
Or dragon boats. I mean, it's clearly a popular area there. I used to go there when I was a kid. Yeah. But there's only certain things that you can do safely in that space. Yeah. So to have a clubhouse there that could facilitate those kind of activities, it's a lost opportunity. And it erodes people's faith in government's ability to get their act together and to cooperate so that these kinds of goods can flow to the community.
Yeah. As you said, it's a totally missed opportunity there. And that's probably a reflection of the previous council's scorecard. I think with this council's scorecard, I think from an outsider, the chamber decorum has changed. It's a lot more mature. The efficiency, like if you're looking from the outside, there's a lot more roadworks being done. Now I know that you've placed up a lot of things. There's been comments about Terrace Road, and then, to be honest, it's not the greatest. You might have to talk to the contractors.
I always take my heart into my hands when I post about roads. We get a fortnightly update, and I think that that's good news. And you can go out and you can say, oh look, we've completed this project, or this one's underway, or this one's approved, but works will commence by. And overwhelmingly, 90% of the comments are incredibly negative, and I have to then weigh up, whether this is just typical negativity that I should push back on. I mean, there's been a lot of negativity about the mall, but the mall's looking pretty good now.
Yeah.
And the kinds of concerns that people had about how much space is there for alfresco dining, how much space is there for the markets, are there too many garden beds? What species are we planting? Oh, we lost the shade trees, and all the rest of it. I'd ask people to come and have a look at the mall now that it's largely done, and to reconsider whether that negativity that they held was really warranted. And in the same way, when I put out a post about the state of the local roads, we're catching up on a massive backlog. That said, I am very aware of this perception that when we say that we're fixing a road, we're just getting a little bit of gravel and putting a little bit of,
hot mix
over the top, and then raking it lightly with a feather, and then pissing off. And I think that the quality of a lot of those works do leave a lot to be desired.
Yeah.
And this is a systemic problem. It's not just our council. We have the greatest difficulty in securing raw materials, bitumen, gravel, and contractors that are capable and competent to do that work.
Well, competent is the big one.
It isn't good enough, is that we say we fix a road and then the potholes start reappearing within a matter of weeks. Sometimes that's because of weather. So you fix a road and then there's a deluge and a lot of that good work is lost almost straight away. But we can't control the weather. So, I would prefer to do less, but to do it more competently, than to try and spread ourselves too thin, like the hot mix seems spread very, very thin over some of our road repairs. And for the benefit of your viewers, I'm using scare quotes.
Yeah, well, no, the air quotes.
When I use the word repairs, that's just an ongoing conversation that we as councillors have with our staff and our Director of Infrastructure about the quality of works that we're doing and the quality of the contractors that we get to do that work for us.
Yeah, and I think that's where people are sort of. I believe it's a lot more negativity, like they're just the general whinging and council bashing, as it's put. I am heartened to see that you see machinery on the side of roads and roads that are getting fixed. Out at Glossy, there's like a small little section of road that's been repaired that links Golden Valley Way across, and it's where the little telephone hotbox is. And it was warped. It was all pothole and bumpy and everything. They've fixed it all up, and it's perfect now.
We've done a lot, and I want to remind your listeners just how far behind the eight ball we were. Yeah. Because of repeated floods. It gives me pleasure now to drive down Packer Road, that it's been sealed for the first time in history. A road that was in such a shocking state of repair that when we were contemplating about whether we'd continue to devote the funds to that, there were people who'd lost loved ones. Yeah. There were fatalities on that road. There was,
and that was the hard.
And here council was at the cusp of abandoning that process, and I'm pleased to say I was one of the ones that said, no, we made a pledge to that community.
Yeah.
It was part of the special rate variation. We said that if we hiked up everyone's rates, these are the kinds of capital improvements that we would finish. And I made damn sure that we would finish them. And we have. And that's now sealed. And it's a safer road, that crucial east-west link between the Putty Road and the river.
Yeah.
It's used by hundreds, thousands of people every day. It's now a permanent improvement that will be maintained to that standard for the rest of time. Yeah. So I gained some small satisfaction for small wins like that, just like I did when I managed to twist the arm of my colleagues and find the money to seal Old Stockroot Road and Brennan's Dam Road at Vineyard there.
Yep.
Because that's used by every resident of Oakville, Vineyard and Pitttown to try and get through to the Windsor Road.
Yeah.
And it's a short stretch of dirt road. I mean, it shouldn't have taken decades and decades to get that sealed. I'm proud to say that I was the person that found the money to get that sealed and twisted the arm of everybody with some federal money. So kudos to the federal government for providing black spot and roads to recovery funding. It's some of the things that, you know, we should do more of. There still gives that section of commercial road that links into that, coming down from the new development at Vineyard Stage 1. We've got to get that sealed. That's next on my list.
Yeah, and I think in the end to say, well, we're at the 11:30 mark and we don't want to too much time up. And I have Telegraph Road for you, and it will be up next, Nathan. That's our little running joke. I've put it in the playlist. But thank you very much for coming in, Nathan. My scorecard for it is the council is an improvement, and they're heading in the right direction. And that's what I want to see. Whereas I think the last council was too much infighting. There was too many egos, and I think with Les, he has the correct balance across the whole school sheet there of controlling, like getting the job done.
Les is old school, and he's doing a good job. I like Les. There's still a couple of bad eggs that we could do with getting rid of, but you know that's a conversation for another time.
That's up to democracy, and they got voted in. The only way they get removed is to be voted out, and that's how it is. All right, let's take a word from our sponsors. Thanks, Nathan, for coming in. It's great to chat to you.